Hello, today I have a very special book to talk about, and that is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is the first book in the Farseer trilogy, as well as her much larger The Realm of the Elderlings series. It was first published in 1995, and I know I'm one of the last people on Fantasy BookTube who has read this book, but it was well worth the wait for me. And I want to talk about two things that made this a very special experience for me, in addition to Robin Hobb's beautiful writing. So the first was timing. Now, before reading this book, I had been reading a bunch of other books at the time that kind of felt like they dealt a little more with ideas of the mind and of existence and a lot of wonderful intellectually stimulating ideas that I greatly enjoyed, but I was craving a book that would bring me into my heart. And that is when I knew it was time to pick up Assassin's Apprentice, because I knew from so many people who had read Robin Hobb's works before that Robin Hobb has a way of just pulling on your heartstrings. And another thing that informed my decision was knowing that this would be a slow burn fantasy that maybe didn't rely quite as heavily on battle and action scenes as some other fantasy these days. So I had the right expectation going into this book, and it delivered. It was a beautiful story, so well written. It is told in first person, past tense, from the character Fitz's perspective. And I have to say that for a young boy, a young orphan boy's perspective, I related to Fitz probably more than any other fantasy character I can think of. And it was to the point when I asked my husband, who had read this book before me, "Did you think of me when you read this book? Did you think of me when you read about Fitz?" And he said no. But I think that just speaks to how well Robin Hobb writes characters, how convincing her characterization is, and how she brings forth such powerful themes, such as heart-shattering loneliness and the desire for belonging, connection, compassion, sense of adventure, so many different things, loyalty. And although, while this is in first person past tense, I also should mention that it seems to be that we are reading this story from Fitz's perspective from somewhere way later than this book is written. So it seems like there are gaps in the memory, perhaps, either gaps in Fitz's memory or things he chooses to omit, and they seem to have a purpose. So I think that's something worth noting when you're reading it, and you seem to think there are scenes that seem to be skipped a little bit here and there. I can't help but wonder if that was done with purpose. So I thought that was interesting. That was an interesting aspect of the story. This book takes place in the Kingdom of the Six Duchies, which I'll put a map on the screen, and it's in a bit of an uproar when news of Fitz's existence as the Crown Prince's one major mistake becomes widely known. And so, in order not to cause further upset to the kingdom, the Crown Prince decides to quietly step away with his wife and leaves the succession of the crown to his brothers and, of course, to the then king, King Shrewd. And so Fitz is brought up from stable life when they don't know what to do with him into a room in the palace. And just seeing that transition was interesting because you get a sense of Fitz having a very contrasting experience from being in the stables with animals, where he learns about his gift to sort of go into the minds of certain animals, and to the very cold, solitary confines of what should be a more habitable sort of place in the palace. And it also seems to be symbolic of his double life that he leads, because in order to make use of Fitz, he is assigned to train as an assassin, which is very much kept secret, even from people within the palace, as well as in the stables and friends he has in the town, where he's known more as like a lowborn. So it's interesting just seeing how these sort of contrasting experiences show Fitz's journey as he's coming of age, learning his identity, and trying to keep things together as he's playing this game of hiding one identity from the other to certain people. So there's a great amount of subterfuge that's also explored in this story. Without giving too much away about the plot, I will say that there is an enemy that comes to the Six Duchies with a very dark kind of magic, and that makes it all the more important that Fitz learns his magical skills, which are very difficult, that are reliant upon innate ability as well as a great range of effort. And so you see his journey with that along the way. And you see how this story becomes much more politically charged with Fitz at the heart of it. Some tropes and themes that are in this story include ones that are very familiar and beloved among fantasy fans, including animal companions, the orphan trope. It's a coming of age story with beautiful character moments, moments of compassion, and one of the main themes I would say is fatherhood as well. Now, I was in a wonderful discussion over on Bean Reed's channel, and we were discussing diversity in fantasy, and somebody had asked about a fantasy series that brings up the theme of fatherhood. And somebody, I think a lot of people in the chat actually chimed in and said that the Farseer trilogy really deals with fatherhood in a lot of different ways. It really explores what it means to be a father, and you see that right away in the first book. There are some very important central father figures in Fitz's life, a lot of interesting relationships with men, and how that, of course, is formative for Fitz's identity as he is a young boy. So I found that very interesting to explore, but there are just amazing character moments in general, also with some female characters as well. And as far as the world building, I want to say that Robin Hobb does an amazing job of just bringing the Six Duchies to life. I felt grounded every location that Fitz was in, and at the same time, you get a great sense of description and history without feeling overwhelmed by it either. The story still carries forward. As far as the pacing is concerned, I did mention that this is a bit of a slow burn fantasy. It did feel to me a little on the slow side to start. I was thoroughly engaged though, and after a while I felt completely swept away in the story, and I felt like it picked up the pace quite a bit all the way through to the end. So this was just a beautiful read all around, and the plot was very, very good. Also, it had a lot of political intrigue, and I was very surprised to go back to the beginning and reread certain parts and have greater questions after finishing the book than I had to start. It's interesting how she does that in very, very subtle ways. The way she will turn a sentence or hint at something very subtle but carry you forward in the story without drawing too much attention to it. And a good example of this is brought to light on Jimmy's video, the scene you might have missed in Assassin's Apprentice. So that's Jimmy from the Fantasy Network. I haven't watched very many reviews since finishing the book. I watched 2 and his was one of them. So please watch that video because he talks about a scene that happens early on in the book that is just mind-blowing. If you missed it, I missed it. But wow, it just shows you what an incredible writer Robin Hobb is. She does so much in such a subtle way and in a beautiful way too. So I'm so excited that I read this book. It did tug on my heartstrings at times, I will say that. Of course, I can't go into spoilers here, but I hope you pick this up if you haven't yet. And if you have, you'll have to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.